Hey guys, welcome to this new series that I'm going to do. It's going to be, 4 or 5 different teachings on this, but we're going to talk about anxiety. A lot of people are on the grip of anxiety. They don't know how to get rid of it. They don't understand what's going on with them. And so it tends to be an issue that all of us deal with. I deal with it. Everyone deals with it. But we want to make sure that we're not being controlled by anxiety. And so we're going to call this series Breaking the Grip of Anxiety. And basically we're going to look at how the brain, scripture, and healing all intersect because we're dealing with a lot of complicated issues here. And you got to think that, anxiety is not just simply a thinking straight issue. Yes, that's part of it, but it's also a mental health issue as well. So sometimes people put their mental health and their brain in the wrong category, and they put it in spiritual category. And what ends up happening is if you mistake health issues or brain activity for spiritual issues, you're not going to treat it properly. And so we want to talk about how to look at anxiety from multiple levels and realize, okay, what do I need to be dealing with? For many people, anxiety is a mystery for them. It's even paralyzing to them. It arrests all that they do. They have panic attacks and all kinds of stuff starts happening to them. But if you understand what's going on in the brain and then what God says about anxiety, and then you can start getting a grip on this and get to the process of working through it, getting some healing, and seeing yourself free of this. So let's first off we want to understand is the brain, okay? And this is important because if it's a brain malfunction, then that has to be addressed by a doctor. And this is where you can't over-spiritualize things that are happening to you. You first have to see if there's a medical issue. God created our brain in a very powerful way, right? It has powerful chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. And these are the communication system of our brain, okay? They fire signals across neurons to regulate how we feel. We can feel happy, we can feel sad, calm, anxious, or whatever. So what ends up happening, just talking about the brain itself, not spirituality yet, some neurotransmitters that a lot of psychologists or psychiatrists will call happy messengers include serotonin and dopamine and what they call GABA. These are the neurotransmitters that send these happy messengers through your brain to make you feel peace, joy, clarity, a lack of anxiety, tranquility. And then you have others like cortisol that gets released, and certain enzymes are sad messengers, okay? And when they are released, they trigger fear, fatigue, flight, depression, And so what ends up happening when you have a healthy brain, it keeps both in balance, okay? So what happens to some people is their brain gets out of balance, and they have negative messengers constantly being sent, and it shuts them down. When we look at how we're constructed, God designed our inner life, in our soul, our thoughts, our emotions. But then when you talk about the brain, we're talking about the physical body. There is a difference between the brain and our minds, okay? So that's why you just can't simply go after this with telling people to think straight. That's part of the issue as far as the mind is concerned. The truth sets you free. But what if the person is having a brain malfunction? Well, that's a chemistry issue. That's a biological issue. And that's why a doctor is needed in that sense. If you do not treat the brain and at least evaluate what's happening in your brain, and you just treat it as all spiritual and it's a brain issue, you'll never get to the bottom of it unless God does a supernatural miracle, which is very rare. So we have to understand that our brain chemistry can affect our body, And when it affects our body or our brain, then it can also affect our spirit as well. Okay, so let's talk about the brain. When the brain gets out of balance, things start getting disrupted. And things can disrupt the brain and cause anxiety. So illness is an issue that can cause the brain to get out of balance. Substance abuse definitely gets the brain out of balance. There's genetic issues that can throw off brain chemistry. And one of the biggest culprits that bring problems to our brain is chronic stress. If you're under constant stress, and I don't know who isn't, your brain will flood with cortisol. And so it overrides the calming neurotransmitters like GABA. Your fight or flight system then takes over, and suddenly your body is in emergency mode all the time. Or you can't control it. You'll have like a panic attack and not know why. And then when you look at scripture, like Psalm 42:5 will say, "Why are you cast down, O my soul? Why are you disquieted within me? Hope in God." Now, there's a lot of things that can cause us a cast down soul. Whether you want to call that depression or anxiety, whatever, cast down is a concept of where a sheep, its wool is too heavy and it gets turned over and he's on his back and he can't right himself because his wool is so heavy, he can't get back up. And so he's stuck there on his back. And so Psalm 42 describes how people get, whether you get that way spiritually or you get that way from your brain chemistry, you can become cast down to where you're stuck. You can't get out, right? Whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety. And again, at this point, we don't know what it is, but people definitely feel that, right? And even King David, when he wrote that, he said, "Look, I'm cast down." So there's like an internal chaos that's going on that can consume us. So here's the thing about anxiety: it can spiral out of control, and your brain can spiral into chronic anxiety, and to where you can't sleep. That becomes a very difficult thing for a lot of people. You lose joy in the things you used to love. Like if you had hobbies that you used to do and now you just don't feel like doing them, it's part of the depression issue. You feel emotionally exhausted because when you're on high alert with anxiety, you're just too tired. And then these panic attacks will strike without any warning. They come out of left field. And you got to remember, if the brain is malfunctioning, this is not a matter of overthinking something. It's biochemical. But at the same time, it's linked to your spiritual, right? So the spiritual battle is real. And of course, when we start having this anxiety, it's fear, it's worry, it's all this depression coming in, and it throws us into chaos. And so when someone reads 2 Timothy 1:7 that says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind," a lot of people say, "Yeah, I'd like to experience that, but right now I can't stop this spirit of fear. I would like to feel power and love and sound mind, but right now, Brandon, I don't feel like it." And so that's what we have to address with anxiety. First of all, let's talk about the warning signs of imbalance in our head. Are you edgy? Are you snapping at loved ones for no reason? Are you exhausted but you still can't sleep? You have no peace and it's just you feel in turmoil and chaotic inside you, those types of things. Proverbs 4:23 commands us to keep our hearts with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life. And so part of guarding our heart is setting a lot of times emotional boundaries. Do we have emotional boundaries with people? That helps us. But again, we're talking about, is this spiritual? Is this relational? Is this mental? Is this brain chemistry? We got to learn to say that's enough. We got to put up boundaries and limitations on people. That's part of it. We'll talk more about that later on. But many people think that they're weak because they can't think their way out of anxiety. But the mind and the brain are very different. The mind chooses thoughts. The brain runs the chemical show, basically. And so sometimes our thoughts are okay, we're thinking okay, but our neurotransmitters are out of balance. And so when we look at Philippians 4:6-7, be anxious for nothing, well, when you're out of balance, you're not going to apply that scripture very well. It's going to be very difficult to be anxious for nothing because you won't be able to stop it. When we talk about other things in our bodies that like GABA, psychologists and psychiatrists will talk about GABA. And I don't want to get too technical, but it's basically a natural tranquilizer that your brain releases. You have natural tranquilizers in your brain, and sometimes they don't work. So what this does is it slows your racing thoughts, it relaxes your nervous system, but if you have prolonged stress, it produces cortisol, and that cortisol then blocks the GABA from doing its job of giving you a natural tranquilizer. So, in many ways you can think about GABA as trying to go to sleep, but cortisol is already in bed. And so until the cortisol leaves, you're not going to sleep because your GABA is not able to get in there and do its job. And then again, this is why people have a hard time sleeping. It's blocking those receptors. And so, people will say, well, even if I'm mentally calm, I still feel anxious. Yeah, that's true because something's going on in the brain sometimes. Ecclesiastes 4:6 says, better a handful of quietness than both hands full together with toil and grasping for the wind. And some people won't be able to feel that quietness and that calm because their receptors are not able to get it, the happy messengers, because they're being flooded with cortisol and other things that create problems for them to feel calm and to have that natural tranquilizer. So you have to understand that everybody has a different capacity for stress. Okay, some have a low threshold. Sometimes it's their genetics or life trauma, but all of us can be overwhelmed if stress goes unchecked. And this is where your self-awareness and your boundaries come in. This is how you figure this out. If you remind yourself of what Jesus did when there was a lot of pressure on him, he withdrew and prayed. Luke 5:16 says, so he himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. So Jesus needed rest and retreat, and so do we. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. So when we talk about our brain, some anxiety comes from within the brain itself, and this is called endogenous anxiety. It's not triggered by thoughts, but by chemistry. And that's why people who love God and read scripture suffer panic attacks, and they have no control over it. So their brains are not functioning properly, and we're all reminded, and this is part of the fall, that our bodies groan under the weight of the fallen world. Romans 8:22-23 talks about that. And so our bodies are feeling the results of the fall. We're dying, and it's our stuff's not working very well. And the older we get, we start realizing our stuff's not working very well. So if it's a brain issue, and that's why if someone comes to me in counseling and they're having anxiety and it's off the chart anxiety, I'm going to first have them go to a psychiatrist, or I'm going to have them first go to a therapist or a medical doctor, and I want them evaluated. I want to see, first of all, is this a medical issue, a brain issue, not so much a thinking issue? Because if it's a thinking issue, then we'll go through the whole idea of how to think correctly, using truth, all right? Truth sets us free. And you putting boundaries and limitations and trying to eliminate stress and people that cause us anxiety. But I got to first know if it's a brain issue. God gave us wisdom. He gave wisdom to doctors and insight into our brain, and we need to use that. Do not over spiritualize this and say, I'm not going to the doctor because he's going to put me on some medication. You might have to be put on medication. And you might have to be put on it maybe for a season or maybe for your entire life in order to get yourself back to normal. And here's the thing about this. If one medication doesn't work, then your doctor or psychiatrist will figure out, there's ways of figuring out what medication, what amount works for you. And so do not be adverse to taking medication. It's part of our lives. It's part of our fallen world. And if it makes me not have panic attacks, if it puts me in balance, if it puts me at normal, then why would I not take advantage of that? Do not over-spiritualize this. God gave us medicine. God gave us doctors. I know, there's all kinds of issues there, but in general, we need to use the collective wisdom of medicine and what they're finding out about the brain and figure out something that works. Okay? Maybe you won't. Maybe they'll do an evaluation and you won't need anything. And maybe they'll say, well, it's you just not thinking correctly. It's a cognitive issue, not a brain issue. Well, good. Well, we got to eliminate that, okay? So here's what happens. If you're having panic attacks, what typically the doctors will do is start giving you artificial tranquilizers, which mimic the brain's natural GABA system that gives you tranquility and peace, not this fight or flight thing. But they're not going to heal the root issue. You might have to be on tranquilizers for a season because your brain may stop, is not producing the right thing. But you won't be on it all your life, typically. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. But most of the time, they want to get it to the point where they get you through a season and then get your brain to produce it naturally, because your brain will naturally produce it. And that's the goal, is restoring the natural balance, not dependency, but restoring the natural balance and letting your brain give you the natural tranquility and tranquilizers that God created it to do. But you might have to, in order to get there, you might have to take medication. Again, that's the fallen world that we live in. So you have to understand that. And then at the same time, if the doctor can get you to natural balance and where your brain is actually making the proper amount of chemistry and the neurotransmitters are firing to give you the happy thoughts, the tranquilizer aspect, then you work with someone like me, a counselor or a pastor, to lower your stress and to put boundaries and limitations on things and to figure out how to, you're not going to eliminate, but reduce your anxiety and your stress. And that's what that aspect does. And that's where someone like me would take you spiritually. Okay, what are we doing? What do we got to say no to now? What do we got to say yes to? What do we got to do to reduce your stress? That kind of stuff, right? And so understand this. The path of anxiety and out of anxiety isn't quick. Okay, it's not overnight, but it's possible. And you got to fight through it. You got to understand your brain. So that's the first thing. We got to read the warning signs. We got to set boundaries. We'll talk about that. We got to seek help. A lot of people just sit there and they won't seek help, and they pray and pray and pray. And it's like, well, God's sending you doctors. Go to the doctor, for goodness sake. Go to the therapist. Go to the counselor. Let's start there. God will not do what he expects you to do. So you can't just sit on the couch and say, God, bring it all to me. It doesn't work that way. God will provide, but you have to go out and get it. It's like God providing the promised land for Israel, okay? It's theirs. He gave it to them. And what did Israel have to do? They had to fight for it. That's the idea. So God has the answers for you, but he's not going to serve it up to you on a silver platter. You have to have the motivation to go out and get it. And as you're beating the bushes and you're talking to this doctor, talking to that, and you're talking to a therapist and you're talking to a counselor, what you'll start seeing is God is providing the help as you do what you're responsible to do, okay? Now, that's the admonition. We're going to continue this discussion in the next few episodes about this because it's a big issue and everyone's dealing with it. I'm dealing with it. And so no one's immune to anxiety. No one's immune to stress. It's all hitting us. And because of what's going on today in the world, people have more stress than they have ever had in their life. Life is very complex. It's not simple like it was in 1950. It's very complex. There's a lot of variables hitting all of us, and we can't stay up with it. And so people are getting overwhelmed. So it's a real issue. We want to talk about it. So stay tuned in the next episodes that we're going to go all through this and hopefully get some resolution to this and so where it becomes manageable, okay? All right, God bless you. We'll see you next time.